Hey guys, tonight we're going back to the very heart of the ancient world. Tonight's lit by firelight, where voices carried stories through the dark, where gods and monsters walked the same earth as men, and every choice could change the course of history. Before we begin, if you enjoy quiet, dark stories from the past, feel free to support the channel with a free subscription. And tell me, where are you watching from right now? I read every comment. It's always wild to see people tuning in from all over the world. So, find a quiet place. This is Myth Night, where you can close your eyes and drift into the greatest Greek myths of all time. Thunder rolls across the ancient Mediterranean sky. Far below, waves crash against rocky shores where olive trees bend in the salt wind. The air itself seems to shimmer with something beyond the ordinary world we know. This is Greece, 3,000 years ago, when gods walked among mortals and heroes could change the fate of nations with a single choice. Picture yourself standing on a hilltop overlooking the wine-dark sea. The sun sets behind distant islands, painting the sky in shades of gold and deep purple. In this twilight hour, when day surrenders to night, the boundary between our world and theirs grows thin. You can almost hear the whispers of ancient voices carried on the evening breeze, telling stories that have survived empires and outlasted kingdoms. These are not just tales from a forgotten past. These are the myths that built the foundation of Western civilization, stories so powerful they still echo in our movies, our books, and our dreams. Tonight, we journey into a realm where love can start wars, where wisdom carries a spear, and where even death itself bows to greater powers. The ancient Greeks believed their gods lived just beyond the clouds, watching everything, feeling everything, intervening in human affairs with the passion and jealousy of mortals, but with the terrible power of immortals. They created a mythology so rich and complex that scholars still debate its meanings today. But you don't need to be a scholar to feel the pull of these stories. You just need to close your eyes and let yourself be carried away, high above the mortal world, where eagles dare not fly and clouds gather like wool around impossible peaks, stands Mount Olympus. This is no ordinary mountain. Its summit pierces the very fabric of reality, existing simultaneously in our world and beyond it. The ancient Greeks believed this towering peak, the highest in their land, served as the gateway to the realm of the gods. Imagine climbing this sacred mountain. The air grows thinner with each step, and the temperature drops until your breath forms clouds before your face. But as you near the top, something extraordinary happens. The harsh wind dies away, replaced by a gentle, warm breeze that carries the scent of ambrosia and the sound of distant laughter. You've crossed from the mortal realm into something far greater. The palace of the gods spreads before you like a vision from the most incredible dream. Walls of living clouds shift and shimmer, sometimes transparent as glass, sometimes solid as marble. Golden light emanates from within, not harsh like sunlight, but warm and welcoming like candlelight, magnified 1,000 times. Gardens stretch in every direction, filled with flowers that bloom in colors that have no names, tended by the gentle hands of minor deities who sing as they work. At the center of this divine realm stands the great throne room, its ceiling open to the infinite sky. 12 thrones arranged in a perfect circle represent the 12 Olympian gods, each throne reflecting the personality and power of its occupant. Zeus's throne towers above the others, carved from a single massive sapphire that seems to contain living lightning. Hera's throne sits beside it, crafted from ivory and gold, decorated with peacock feathers that move with a life of their own. The air itself hums with power here. Every breath you take fills your lungs with the essence of immortality. Time moves differently in this place. A moment might last forever, or centuries might pass in the blink of an eye. The gods exist outside the normal flow of time, and their palace reflects this divine freedom. From this sacred mountain, the gods watch over the world below. They see every sparrow that falls, every tear that falls, every prayer whispered in desperation or gratitude. But they are not distant observers. They are active participants in the great drama of existence, quick to love, quick to anger, quick to intervene when their interests are threatened or their pride wounded. The ancient Greeks understood something profound about divinity. Their gods were not perfect beings of pure goodness. They were magnificent, terrible, beautiful, and flawed. They represented the full spectrum of existence, magnified to cosmic proportions. Love and war, wisdom and foolishness, justice and vengeance, creation and destruction, all found their home on Mount Olympus. As night falls over the sacred mountain, the palace glows brighter, as if the god's power increases with the darkness. Strange music drifts on the wind, melodies that would drive mortals to madness with their beauty. The stars themselves seem to dance in response to this divine symphony. This is where our journey truly begins, in the halls of the immortals, where every story starts with power beyond imagination and every ending reshapes the world. Lightning splits the sky above Olympus as Zeus, king of all gods, raises his hand. The very air trembles at his presence, standing 12 feet tall, with a beard like storm clouds and eyes that hold the deep blue of the sky just before thunder breaks. Zeus commands attention without speaking a word. His voice, when it comes, rumbles like distant mountains colliding. But Zeus was not always king. His story begins in darkness and betrayal, in a time when the universe itself was young and the future hung in the balance. Long ago, before humans walked the earth, before the sun and moon found their paths across the sky, the world belonged to the Titans. These primordial beings ruled with absolute power, led by Kronos, Zeus's own father. But Kronos had heard a terrible prophecy. One of his children would overthrow him, just as he had overthrown his own father. In his fear and paranoia, Kronos chose to devour each of his children the moment they were born. Picture the horror of Rhea, Zeus's mother, as she watched her husband swallow her babies whole. Child after child disappeared into Kronos' maw. Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon. Each birth brought joy, followed immediately by devastating loss. When Zeus was born, Rhea could bear no more. In desperation, she wrapped a stone in swaddling clothes and presented it to her husband. Kronos, in his haste and paranoia, swallowed the stone without noticing the deception. Meanwhile, baby Zeus was spirited away to the island of Crete, hidden in a cave on Mount Ida. There, nymphs fed him goat's milk and honey, while warrior priests, called the Curetes, clashed their shields and spears to mask his cries. The infant god grew strong in secret, nurtured by the earth itself. When Zeus reached adulthood, he returned to challenge his father. But this would not be a simple battle of strength. Zeus possessed something his father lacked, the wisdom to seek allies and the charisma to inspire loyalty. He convinced the Titaness Metis to prepare a special drink for Kronos. The potion forced the Titan king to vomit up all the children he had swallowed, and they emerged fully grown and burning with righteous anger. The war that followed shook the very foundations of existence. The Titanomachy, as it came to be known, raged for 10 years. Mountains were hurled like stones, seas boiled and dried. The sky itself cracked under the assault of divine powers. Zeus and his siblings fought alongside the Cyclopes, who forged for Zeus his legendary thunderbolt, and the hundred-handed ones, whose strength was beyond measure. The final battle took place on a plane that no longer exists, obliterated by the cosmic forces unleashed there. Zeus stood atop a mountain of storm clouds, his thunderbolt crackling with the power of 1,000 storms. When he hurled it at his father, the blast could be heard across all of creation. Kronos fell, and with him, the age of the Titans ended. But victory brought new challenges. Zeus and his brothers drew lots to divide the cosmos. Zeus claimed the sky and became king of all gods. Poseidon took dominion over the seas and earthquakes. Hades received the underworld and the realm of the dead. The earth they would share among all the gods. As king, Zeus ruled from his throne of sapphire and lightning. His word became cosmic law. When he nodded in agreement, the entire universe trembled with possibility. When he frowned in displeasure, mortals and immortals alike trembled in fear. He held in his hands the power to create and destroy, to elevate mortals to godhood, or cast gods into the deepest pit of Tartarus. Zeus's reign was marked by both justice and passion. He was the protector of guests and strangers, the enforcer of oaths, the guardian of the natural order. But he was also known for his numerous love affairs, both with goddesses and mortal women. These relationships often led to conflict with his wife Hera, but they also brought forth many of the greatest heroes and gods of Greek mythology. From his throne on Olympus, Zeus watches over all creation. His eagles soar across the sky, carrying his messages to every corner of the world. When thunder rolls across the heavens, the ancients knew it was Zeus speaking. When lightning illuminates the darkness, it is his power made manifest. The King of Gods embodies the ultimate paradox of power, the strength to rule justly and the wisdom to know when mercy serves better than punishment. In Zeus, the Greeks saw both the terrible might of the storm and the life-giving power of rain. The ocean stretches endlessly before you, its surface deceptively calm under the afternoon sun. But beneath those peaceful waves lies a realm of unimaginable power and mystery, ruled by a god whose temper can be as gentle as a summer breeze or as violent as a hurricane. This is the domain of Poseidon, brother to Zeus and lord of all waters. Poseidon emerges from the depths, riding a chariot pulled by hippocampi, creatures that are half horse, half fish, their scales gleaming like precious metals in the filtered sunlight. His trident, forged by the same Cyclopes who made Zeus's thunderbolt, can split islands in half or create new ones with a single strike. His beard flows like sea foam, and his eyes hold the deep green of ocean depths, where sunlight has never penetrated. But Poseidon's story is not just one of marine majesty. It is a tale of rivalry, passion, and the eternal struggle between order and chaos that rages beneath the waves. After the defeat of the Titans, when the three brothers divided the cosmos, Poseidon initially resented receiving the oceans. He coveted Zeus's dominion over the sky and the supreme authority that came with it. This resentment would simmer for millennia, occasionally erupting into conflicts that shook both heaven and earth. One of the most famous contests occurred when both Poseidon and the goddess Athena desired to be the patron deity of a great city that would later be known as Athens. The citizens decided to choose based on which god could provide the most useful gift. Poseidon struck the ground with his trident, and a spring of water burst forth. but the water was salty, like the sea itself, and not suitable for drinking. Athena planted an olive tree, offering wood, oil, and food. The people chose Athena's gift, and the city bore her name. Poseidon's rage at this rejection sent massive waves crashing against the shores for years. In his underwater palace, built from coral and decorated with pearls the size of shields, Poseidon rules over a kingdom more vast than all the land-based empires combined. Schools of fish serve as his messengers, carrying news from every corner of the ocean. Dolphins, his sacred animals, play in the gardens of sea anemones that surround his throne. The Nereids, 50 sea nymphs of extraordinary beauty, attend his court, their voices harmonizing with the rhythm of the tides. But Poseidon is not just the god of the sea. He is also the Earthshaker, lord of earthquakes and tectonic forces. When his anger reaches its peak, he strikes the ocean floor with his trident, sending tremors that can topple cities and reshape coastlines. The ancient Greeks understood that the same god who brought them fish and favorable winds could also bring tsunamis and seismic destruction. His most famous creation was the horse. When competing for the affections of the goddess Demeter, Poseidon boasted he could create the most beautiful animal in the world. He crafted the first horse from sea foam and wind, giving it the power to run across both land and water. Though Demeter's heart was not won, the horse became one of humanity's greatest allies, a gift that connected the power of the sea to the speed of the land. Poseidon's children were as varied as the moods of the ocean itself. Some, like the hero Theseus, brought glory to their divine parentage. Others, like the Cyclops Polyphemus, became monsters of terrible power. The sea god's union with the Gorgon Medusa produced Pegasus, the winged horse that would carry heroes to their destinies. Sailors knew to offer prayers and sacrifices to Poseidon before embarking on any voyage. A white bull was the preferred offering, its blood mixing with the salt spray as priests called upon the god's protection. Those who honored him could expect favorable winds and calm seas. Those who offended him faced storms that could last for years, as the hero Odysseus would learn to his great cost. The ocean holds memories that the land has forgotten. In its depths lie the ruins of cities that angered Poseidon, their streets now home to fish and their temples covered in coral. The sea god's justice is absolute and eternal. Once earned, his wrath can pursue a victim across generations, while his favor can lift a simple fisherman to kingship. When storms rage across the Mediterranean, when waves tower like moving mountains, and lightning illuminates walls of water, that is Poseidon in his full majesty. The ancient Greeks would watch from shore, feeling both terror and awe at the raw power of nature unleashed. They understood that the sea was not just water, but the living expression of a god's will, beautiful and terrible in equal measure. As night falls over the ocean, bioluminescent creatures begin to glow in the depths, creating underwater constellations that mirror the stars above. This is Poseidon's evening court, where the business of the sea is conducted in whispers carried by the current, and where the deepest mysteries of existence are discussed in languages older than human speech. Far beneath the world of sunlight and growing things, deeper than the deepest cavern, lies a realm that the living fear to name. This is the underworld, domain of Hades, the god whose very name was whispered lest speaking it aloud draw his attention. The ancient Greeks often called him the Rich One or the Unseen One, for his realm contained all the wealth buried in the earth, and his presence was felt but never directly witnessed by mortal eyes. The entrance to his kingdom can be found in many places, through caves that breathe with otherworldly wind, beneath temples where the ground grows cold even in summer, or through cracks in the earth that appeared after earthquakes. But the most famous gateway stands beside the river Acheron, where the ferryman Charon waits with his boat to carry souls across the dark waters. Hades himself is not the evil figure that later traditions would make him. He is stern, yes, and utterly inflexible in matters of justice, but he is not cruel without cause. Tall and imposing, with skin pale as marble and eyes like pools of dark water, he carries himself with the dignity of absolute authority. His beard is black as the space between stars, and his voice carries the weight of finality. When Hades speaks, his words become unalterable fate. His palace lies at the heart of the underworld, built from black marble veined with silver, its walls decorated with precious metals and gems that have never seen sunlight. Here, in halls lit by the gentle glow of phosphorescent stones, Hades sits upon his throne of ebony and listens to the reports of his servants. The Furies bring him news of unavenged crimes. The Fates that spin out the threads of mortal lives. The judges of the dead, Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Iacchus, present their decisions for his approval. The most famous story of Hades concerns his love for Persephone, daughter of Demeter, goddess of the harvest. Walking through a meadow of narcissus flowers, Persephone was gathering blooms when the earth suddenly split open. From the chasm emerged Hades in his chariot, pulled by 4 black horses whose hooves struck sparks from the air itself. In one swift motion, he swept the startled goddess into his chariot and vanished back into the depths. Demeter's grief at her daughter's disappearance was so profound that she neglected her duties. Crops withered in the fields, trees shed their leaves out of season. The earth itself seemed to mourn, growing cold and barren. Zeus, seeing that all life would perish if the situation continued, commanded Hades to return Persephone to her mother. But Hades had grown to love his queen, and she, despite her initial fear, had found herself drawn to the quiet dignity and unexpected gentleness of the Lord of the Dead. Before releasing her, Hades offered Persephone pomegranate seeds, the food of the dead. Whether through trick or genuine affection, she ate them, binding herself to the underworld forever. The compromise reached by Zeus satisfied no one completely, but saved the world. Persephone would spend part of each year with her mother in the world above, and part with her husband in the realm below. When she descends to the underworld, winter comes to the earth as Demeter mourns. When she returns in spring, the world blooms again in celebration. In his realm, Hades oversees the final destination of every soul. The Elysian fields await heroes and the virtuous, a place of eternal spring where the blessed spend their afterlife in joy and peace. Tartarus holds the wicked and those who offended the gods, where punishment fits the crime in ways that stretch across eternity. The Asphodel Meadows receive the vast majority of souls, those who lived ordinary lives, neither particularly good nor particularly evil. Hades rarely leaves his underground kingdom, but when he does, the earth trembles. His chariot, drawn by his immortal horses, can rise through any crack in the ground. Flowers wilt at his approach, not from malice, but simply because his presence carries the weight of endings. Yet he is also the god of hidden wealth. Precious metals, gems, and fertile soil all fall under his dominion. The 3-headed dog, Cerberus, guards the gates of the underworld, ensuring that the dead do not escape and the living do not enter uninvited. Each of his heads can see past, present, and future, and his bark can drive mortals mad with terror. Yet he is gentle with his master, following Hades like an enormous devoted pet. Death, in the Greek understanding, was not evil, but inevitable and necessary. Hades embodied this truth. He was the god who ensured that the cosmic order maintained its balance, that life and death remained separate realms with their own rules and purposes. His justice was absolute, but not arbitrary. Every soul received exactly what they had earned through their actions in life. In the deepest chambers of his palace, Hades keeps the records of every life ever lived. Scrolls stretch for miles, chronicling every deed, every choice, every moment of courage or cowardice. When Judgment Day comes for each soul, these records determine their eternal fate. The Lord of the Dead understands something that the living often forget. Ending is not the enemy of meaning, but its guarantor. Without death, nothing would have weight or value. Without the underworld, the beauty of the living world would be diminished. In his dark kingdom, Hades preserves the memory of all things, ensuring that nothing that matters is ever truly lost. A barn owl hoots in the olive groves as twilight settles over Athens. This is the sacred hour of Athena, when wisdom and strategy reign supreme over brute force and blind courage. The goddess herself stands on the Parthenon, her great temple crowning the Acropolis like a monument to divine intelligence. Her gray eyes, bright as polished silver, survey the city that bears her name, watching over every scholar who burns oil studying late into the night, and every craftsman perfecting their art. Athena's birth was unlike any other in the pantheon of gods. No mother carried her, no gradual growth preceded her arrival. Instead, she sprang fully formed from the head of Zeus himself, already wearing golden armor and carrying a spear that gleamed with its own inner light. The story begins with Zeus's swallowing of Metis, the Titaness of wisdom, whom he had feared would bear a child greater than himself. But wisdom cannot be destroyed so easily. It grew inside Zeus until the pressure became unbearable, manifesting as terrible headaches that threatened to drive even the king of gods to madness. Hephaestus, the divine smith, took his hammer and chisel to Zeus's skull. With one mighty blow, he split it open, and from the crack emerged Athena in all her glory. Her birth cry was a war shout that shook Mount Olympus and announced the arrival of a new kind of divinity, one that combined the fury of war with the careful planning of the strategist. Unlike Ares, the god of brutal combat, Athena represents warfare at its most civilized and strategic. She is the goddess of defensive war, of battles fought to protect home and family rather than for conquest and glory. Her shield, the Aegis, bears the head of the Gorgon Medusa, a gift from the hero Perseus. Its very sight can turn enemies to stone, but Athena uses this power only when absolutely necessary, preferring to win through superior tactics and preparation. The contest for patronage of Athens revealed both her practical wisdom and her understanding of human nature. When Poseidon struck the ground and produced his saltwater spring, it was impressive, but ultimately useless. Athena's olive tree offered everything a civilization needed: food from its fruit, oil for cooking and light, wood for building, and leaves for medicine. Her gift showed foresight, the ability to think beyond the immediate moment, to consider long-term consequences. In her great temple, the Parthenon, stood a statue of the goddess that was considered one of the wonders of the ancient world. Crafted by the master sculptor Phidias, it rose nearly 40 feet tall, its skin made of ivory and its clothing of pure gold. Athena held a small statue of Nike, the goddess of victory, in her outstretched hand, symbolizing that true victory comes through wisdom rather than force alone. But Athena was not just a goddess of war and politics. She was the patron of all skilled crafts, especially weaving. The myth of Arachne illustrates both her mastery and her pride in this art. Arachne, a mortal woman, boasted that her weaving surpassed even that of the goddess. Athena, disguised as an old woman, warned her against such hubris, but Arachne persisted. When the goddess revealed herself, and they held a weaving contest, Arachne's tapestry was indeed flawless, but it depicted the god's cruelties and failings. Enraged by both the skill and the subject matter, Athena transformed Arachne into the first spider, condemning her to weave forever. Heroes sought Athena's guidance more than that of any other god. She aided Perseus in his quest to slay Medusa, giving him a polished shield that allowed him to see the Gorgon's reflection without meeting her deadly gaze. She stood beside Bellerophon when he tamed the winged horse Pegasus and fought the Chimera. Most famously, she was the constant companion of Odysseus during his 20-year journey home from Troy, appreciating his cleverness and resourcefulness. Her relationship with the city of Athens was more than mere patronage. She embodied the ideals that the Athenians held most dear: democracy guided by wisdom, strength tempered by justice, innovation balanced with respect for tradition. The owl became her sacred bird because it can see clearly in the darkness, a perfect symbol for the kind of insight that penetrates confusion and reveals truth. The Panathenaea, the great festival held in her honor every 4 years, transformed Athens into a celebration of everything the goddess represented. Citizens competed in athletic contests, but also in musical competitions, poetry recitals, and displays of craftsmanship. The highlight was the procession that carried a newly woven peplos, a sacred robe, up to the Parthenon to dress the statue of the goddess. In her workshop on Olympus, Athena creates inventions that benefit mortals. She gave them the plow, the rake, the ox yoke, the chariot, and the ship. Each gift required humans to think and plan, to understand cause and effect. She never simply handed over easy solutions, but provided tools that rewarded intelligence and effort. The goddess's justice could be stern, but was always measured. When Ajax the Lesser violated her temple by assaulting Cassandra during the fall of Troy, Athena's punishment was swift and terrible. She sent storms that wrecked the Greek fleet on their way home, ensuring that sacrilege against her sanctuary would not go unpunished. Athena's gray eyes miss nothing. From her temple, she watches over students struggling with difficult lessons, inventors working on new designs, and generals planning campaigns to defend their homeland. She whispers inspiration to those who combine courage with wisdom, who fight not from anger, but from principle, who create not for personal glory, but for the betterment of all. As the stars appear over Athens, reflecting in the gray eyes of the goddess, the city settles into evening routines that have continued for thousands of years. In workshops and schools, by lamplight and candle flame, the work of civilization continues under Athena's watchful protection, guided by the eternal principle that wisdom and strength together can overcome any challenge. The evening star rises over the wine-dark sea, its light shimmering on the gentle waves like scattered diamonds. This is the hour of Aphrodite, when lovers meet in secret gardens and poets find their most beautiful words. Somewhere beyond the horizon, on the island of Cyprus, the goddess of love and beauty tends to her sacred doves in a temple built from rose-colored marble that seems to glow with its own inner warmth. Aphrodite's birth is one of the most mysterious and beautiful stories in all of Greek mythology. She did not arrive on Olympus through conventional birth, but emerged from the sea itself, born from sea foam and divine essence. The tale begins with an act of cosmic violence. When Kronos castrated his father Uranus with an adamantine sickle, the blood fell into the sea. But from this act of destruction came the most beautiful creation imaginable. Picture the moment of her arrival. The sea suddenly grew calm, its surface smooth as polished glass. Then, in the distance, a shell larger than any mortal had ever seen began to rise from the depths, carrying upon it a figure of such perfect beauty that the very air seemed to shimmer around her. Golden hair flowed down her shoulders like liquid sunlight, and her skin held the soft pink glow of dawn clouds. This was Aphrodite, stepping onto the shores of Cyprus, while dolphins sang and the seasons themselves came to welcome her, clothing her in garments that seemed woven from sea mist and starlight. Her power was immediate and absolute. Plants bloomed at her footsteps. Birds burst into song at her laughter. Even the weather seemed to respond to her moods. Gentle breezes when she was content, sudden storms when her heart was troubled. But most dramatically, no living being could resist the force of her presence. Gods and mortals alike found themselves overwhelmed by desires they had never known before. The goddess married Hephaestus, the divine smith, in a union arranged by Zeus to prevent the gods from fighting over her. But this marriage of beauty and craftsmanship was not a happy one. Hephaestus, though skilled beyond measure, was considered the least attractive of the gods, while Aphrodite craved passion and excitement. She found both in her affair with Ares, the god of war, creating one of the most enduring partnerships in mythology, the union of love and war, beauty and strength. Their secret meetings took place in a hidden grotto behind a waterfall, where Hephaestus had built a magnificent bed decorated with precious metals and gems. But the sun god Helios, who sees everything from his daily journey across the sky, witnessed their embraces and reported them to the cuckolded husband. Hephaestus crafted a net so fine it was invisible to the naked eye, but strong enough to hold even gods. The next time the lovers met, they found themselves trapped, exposed before all of Olympus in their passionate embrace. Instead of shame, the incident only enhanced Aphrodite's reputation. The gods laughed at the spectacle, but they also envied Ares, his beautiful lover. Hermes famously declared he would gladly take Ares' place, even if it meant being seen by all the gods. Apollo agreed, and even the usually serious Poseidon found himself stirred by desire. The goddess's power was such that even exposure and humiliation could not diminish her allure. Aphrodite's children reflected the dual nature of her power. With Ares, she bore Eros, love, Anteros, reciprocal love, Deimos, fear, and Phobos, panic, showing how love and war intertwine to create both ecstasy and terror. Her son Eros became her constant companion, a beautiful youth with golden wings, who carried a bow whose arrows could kindle love in any heart. But the goddess's most famous child was born from her relationship with the mortal Anchises. Disguising herself as a mortal woman, she seduced the Trojan prince in a shepherd's hut on Mount Ida. From this union came Aeneas, who would survive the fall of Troy and, according to legend, found the Roman people. Through this son, Aphrodite claimed a direct role in the destiny of what would become the greatest empire in the ancient world. The goddess could be generous to those who honored her, but terrible in her vengeance against those who spurned love or mocked her power. When the women of Lemnos failed to honor her properly, she cursed them with such a foul odor that their husbands abandoned them for Thracian concubines. In revenge, the women killed all the men on the island. Hippolytus, son of Theseus, who chose to remain chaste and worship only Artemis, was destroyed when Aphrodite made his stepmother Phaedra fall hopelessly in love with him, leading to a tragedy that claimed both their lives. The most famous demonstration of her power was the judgment of Paris, which would ultimately lead to the Trojan War. When Eris, goddess of discord, threw a golden apple marked "to the fairest" among the wedding guests at the marriage of Peleus and Thetis, three goddesses claimed it: Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite. Zeus wisely refused to judge between them and appointed Paris, a prince of Troy, to make the decision. Each goddess offered Paris a bribe. Hera promised him dominion over all Asia. Athena offered wisdom and victory in battle. But Aphrodite's offer proved irresistible: the love of the most beautiful woman in the world, Helen of Sparta. Paris chose Aphrodite, setting in motion the events that would lead to the greatest war in mythological history. In her temples, which could be found from Cyprus to Corinth, sacred prostitutes served the goddess, understanding that physical love was a path to divine connection. Rose petals covered her altars, and doves cooed softly in the rafters. Lovers came to pray for success in their romantic endeavors, while married couples sought her blessing for harmony and fertility. Aphrodite understood that love was not always gentle. It could be as destructive as it was creative, as painful as it was joyful. Her power lay not just in physical beauty, but in the recognition that desire drives much of human behavior, that the heart's longings can override the mind's careful plans, and that the force which creates life is also the force that can destroy it. As the moon rises full and bright over the Mediterranean, casting silver pathways across the waves, sailors pause in their work to offer prayers to the foam-born goddess. They know that love, like the sea from which she came, can be calm and nurturing or wild and dangerous, but always beautiful, always powerful, and always worthy of respect and wonder. The peacock spreads its magnificent tail in the sacred grove, each eye spot gleaming like a jewel in the morning light. This is the hour when Hera, queen of the gods, holds court on Mount Olympus, her presence both regal and fierce as she oversees the divine order with an iron will wrapped in golden grace. From her throne of ivory and gold, decorated with the eyes of her sacred peacocks, she surveys the heavens and the earth below, missing nothing, forgetting nothing, forgiving very little. Hera's beauty is different from that of Aphrodite. Where the goddess of love embodies passionate desire, Hera represents dignified majesty. Her dark hair is crowned with a golden diadem, and her robes flow like liquid starlight. Her eyes, described by Homer as cow-eyed, hold the deep, patient power of the earth itself, beautiful but dangerous to those who cross her. As Zeus's wife and sister, Hera's position places her at the heart of Olympus's most complex relationship. Their courtship began in the Golden Age, when the world was young and the gods still discovered their powers. Zeus, already showing the wandering eye that would plague their marriage, pursued Hera with gifts and promises. But the proud goddess would not be easily won. She rebuffed his advances again and again, her dignity intact and her independence fierce. Zeus finally succeeded through trickery, transforming himself into a bedraggled cuckoo during a thunderstorm. He appeared before Hera, shivering and helpless. Her compassionate nature moved her to shelter the poor bird against her breast, whereupon Zeus resumed his true form, and in that moment of vulnerability claimed her as his bride. Their wedding was celebrated by all of creation. Flowers bloomed out of season, rivers ran with nectar instead of water, and the very stars sang wedding hymns. But if their courtship was romantic, their marriage became an epic of conflict. Zeus's countless affairs with goddesses, nymphs, and mortal women became a constant source of rage for Hera. Unable to punish her husband directly, she often turned her wrath upon his lovers and their children. Io was transformed into a cow and tormented by a gadfly that drove her across the world. Leto was forbidden from giving birth on any land under the sun, forced to wander until she found the floating island of Delos. Alcmene, mother of Heracles, became the target of Hera's most sustained campaign of vengeance. The queen's anger toward Heracles began before his birth. When Zeus boasted that a descendant of Perseus, born that day, would rule over all others, Hera delayed Alcmene's labor while hastening that of another descendant, ensuring that Eurystheus would be born first and hold power over the mighty Heracles. Throughout the hero's life, she sent serpents to kill him in his cradle, drove him to madness that caused him to kill his own family, and ensured that his famous 12 labors would be as difficult and dangerous as possible. Yet this same goddess, who could be so ruthless in her revenge, was also the divine protector of marriage and family. She understood the sacred nature of the marital bond and the importance of fidelity to the stability of both divine and mortal society. Women facing difficult births called upon her for protection. New brides offered her gifts, praying that their marriages would be blessed with harmony and children. Her power was vast and varied. As queen of the gods, she commanded respect from all the Olympians except Zeus himself. Even Poseidon and Hades acknowledged her authority in matters of divine protocol. She controlled the winds and storms, could grant or withhold fertility, and possessed the ability to see through any disguise or deception. Her golden chariot, pulled by peacocks, could travel faster than thought itself. The famous judgment of Paris revealed both her pride and her political acumen. When the Trojan prince was asked to choose the fairest among herself, Athena, and Aphrodite, Hera offered him dominion over all of Europe and Asia. Her bribe was the most practical and far-reaching, promising real power rather than wisdom or love. When Paris chose Aphrodite instead, Hera's fury knew no bounds. She became one of the most ardent supporters of the Greeks in the Trojan War, determined that Paris and his city would pay for the insult. During the war, Hera's hatred of Troy led her to dramatic interventions. She seduced Zeus himself, using Aphrodite's girdle to enhance her natural beauty and distract him while the Greeks gained crucial advantages on the battlefield. She convinced Poseidon to aid the Greeks against Zeus's explicit orders, showing that even divine marriages involve complex negotiations of power and influence. The goddess's relationship with her children reflected her complicated nature. She loved Ares despite his brutality, supporting him even when Zeus expressed disappointment in their son's love of violence. She favored Hephaestus, though some versions of the myth claim she bore him without male participation, creating him through will alone as a response to Zeus's birth of Athena. Her daughter Hebe, goddess of youth, served as cupbearer to the gods until she married the finally apotheosized Heracles, a marriage that symbolized Hera's eventual acceptance of her former enemy. Hera's worship was centered at the Heraion of Samos, where a magnificent temple housed her cult statue. Every 4 years, the Heraia Games were held in her honor, the female equivalent of the Olympic Games, where young women competed in foot races, wearing short tunics and with their hair flowing free. These games celebrated not just athletic ability, but the independence and strength that Hera embodied. In the quiet moments between crises, Hera could show a different face. She was the goddess who blessed marriages with love and prosperity, who protected women in childbirth, who ensured that families remained strong and unified. Her peacocks, with their magnificent displays, reminded worshippers that dignity and beauty could coexist with fierce, protective instincts. The queen of the gods understood power in all its forms, the power of love and the power of anger, the power of tradition and the power of transformation. Her conflicts with Zeus reflected the eternal tension between freedom and commitment, between individual desire and social responsibility. In her divine majesty, both terrifying and magnificent, ancient peoples saw reflected their own struggles to balance personal happiness with duty to family and community. As evening falls over Olympus and the peacocks settle in their roosts, Hera stands alone on her balcony, looking out over the world she helps to rule. Her beauty is undiminished by conflict, her authority unshaken by betrayal. She remains always the queen, powerful, proud, and eternal as the institution of marriage itself. The island of Delos floats like a jewel in the Aegean Sea, its shores blessed by the gods, and its groves sacred to the most beautiful twins ever born to immortal parents. Here, beneath the spreading palm tree that still grows beside the sacred lake, Leto gave birth to two children who would become the light and shadow of divine perfection, Apollo and Artemis, each magnificent in their own way, each embodying powers that would shape the fate of gods and mortals alike. Their birth story begins with Zeus's infidelity and Hera's terrible revenge. When the Titaness Leto became pregnant by Zeus, the jealous queen of the gods decreed that no place on earth could give her sanctuary for the birth. Leto wandered for months, growing heavy with child, rejected by every land and island she approached. Finally, she found refuge on Delos, a floating island that, having no fixed place, was not technically part of the earth and thus outside Hera's prohibition. But even then, Hera's vengeance was not complete. She held Eileithyia, the goddess of childbirth, prisoner on Olympus, preventing her from aiding Leto. For 9 days and 9 nights, Leto labored in agony while the other goddesses attending her grew desperate. Finally, they sent Iris, the rainbow messenger, to Olympus with a golden necklace so beautiful that Eileithyia could not resist its bribe. The birth goddess slipped away to help, and the twins were finally born. Artemis came first and immediately assisted in the birth of her brother Apollo. From her first moments of life, she showed the independence and capability that would define her character. When she was only 3 days old, sitting on Zeus's lap, she boldly asked for eternal virginity, a silver bow and arrows, a pack of hunting hounds, and a group of nymphs to serve as her companions. Zeus, charmed by his daughter's directness, granted all her requests. Apollo's birth was heralded by golden light that filled the cave, and swans circled the island 7 times in celebration. Even as an infant, he displayed the beauty and artistic talent that would make him the most admired of all the gods. His first act was to demand a lyre and a bow, the instruments that would define his dual nature as both the bringer of plague and death and the inspirer of music and poetry. The twins, though born moments apart, developed along distinctly different paths. Artemis became the virgin huntress, ranging through the wild forests with her band of nymphs and her pack of silver-white hounds. She ruled over all wild animals, protecting the young and nursing mothers while hunting the old and weak. Her silver arrows never missed their mark, bringing swift, painless death to those she favored and lingering agony to those who offended her. Apollo grew into the god of light, music, poetry, prophecy, and healing. His golden hair caught the sunlight like a halo, and his voice could charm wild beasts or inspire mortals to impossible deeds. Where Artemis embodied the untamed wilderness, Apollo represented civilization and art, yet both shared the same fierce pride and swift anger that characterized their divine bloodline. Their first great act together was the slaying of Python, the enormous serpent that had terrorized the slopes of Mount Parnassus. This monster, born from the earth itself, had pursued their mother during her pregnancy. When Apollo was only 4 days old, he took his silver bow and hunted the creature to its lair at Delphi. There, at the center of the world, he slew Python with 100 arrows and established his most famous oracle on the spot where the monster died. Artemis proved equally protective of her family's honor. When the giant hunters Sootus and Ephialtes boasted they would capture her and Hera as brides, she transformed herself into a white deer and ran between them. In their eagerness to catch her, the giants threw their spears simultaneously, each striking the other and falling dead at her feet. The goddess of the hunt was fiercely protective of her own chastity and that of her followers. When Actaeon, grandson of the gods, accidentally glimpsed her bathing, she transformed him into a stag. His own hunting dogs, not recognizing their master, tore him apart. Orion, the great hunter, met a similar fate when he attempted to assault one of her nymphs. Artemis sent a scorpion that stung him to death, then placed both hunter and scorpion among the stars as eternal enemies. Apollo, meanwhile, experienced the joys and sorrows of love. His pursuit of the nymphs Daphne ended when she begged her father, the river god Peneus, to save her from the gods' advances. Just as Apollo's hands touched her shoulders, she transformed into a laurel tree. Apollo, heartbroken, declared the laurel sacred to him, and its leaves became the crown of victory for poets and athletes. His love for the Spartan prince Hyacinthus ended in tragedy when the jealous west wind caused Apollo's discus to strike and kill the beautiful youth. From Hyacinthus's blood sprang the flower that bears his name, its petals marked with letters that spell out a cry of grief. The twins' most terrible vengeance came when Niobe, queen of Thebes, boasted that she was superior to Leto because she had 14 children while the goddess had only 2. Artemis and Apollo arrived at Thebes like avenging angels. Apollo's arrows struck down all 7 of Niobe's sons as they practiced athletics in the gymnasium. Artemis killed all 7 daughters as they cowered in the palace. Niobe, insane with grief, was transformed into stone, though even in her rocky form, tears continued to flow down her face. Apollo's oracle at Delphi became the most important religious site in the ancient world. There, sitting on a 3-legged stool over a chasm in the earth from which intoxicating vapors rose, the Pythia spoke the god's prophecies in riddling verses that influenced the decisions of kings and commoners alike. The oracle's pronouncements shaped the course of Greek history, from the Trojan War to the rise of Alexander the Great. Artemis preferred the wild places far from human civilization. On the island of Ephesus, her temple was counted among the 7 wonders of the world, its massive columns supporting a roof that seemed to touch the sky. But she was equally at home in moonlit groves, where deer came to drink from sacred springs, or on mountain peaks where only the eagles dared to fly. Both twins shared their father's pride and their mother's fierce protective instincts. They could be generous to those who honored them properly. Apollo inspired the greatest works of art and music, while Artemis protected young mothers and their children. But they were swift to punish any slight, and their anger, once aroused, was as relentless as fate itself. The ancient Greeks saw in these divine twins the dual nature of existence itself. Apollo represented order, civilization, and the power of art to elevate the human spirit. Artemis embodied wildness, independence, and the untamed forces of nature that could nurture or destroy. Together, they showed that beauty could be both creative and destructive, that the same gods who inspired the highest achievements of human culture could also unleash forces beyond mortal comprehension. As the moon rises full and bright over the forests where Artemis hunts, and the first stars appear in the evening sky that Apollo's chariot has just crossed, the twins continue their eternal dance of light and shadow, music and silence, civilization and wilderness, each perfect in their own way, each essential to the cosmic balance that keeps the world turning. The morning mist rises from the wine-dark sea as 1,000 black ships beach on the shores of Troy. Their sails furled, their bronze-tipped rams scarred from the long journey across the Aegean, they stretch along the coast like a dark necklace of war. This is the beginning of the most famous conflict in all of mythology, a war that will rage for 10 years, claim countless heroes, and ultimately demonstrate that even the mightiest cities fall when the gods themselves choose sides. The seeds of this great war were planted at a wedding that should have been a celebration of peace. When the sea goddess Thetis married the mortal king Peleus, all the gods were invited except one, Eris, the goddess of discord. Furious at this slight, she arrived uninvited and threw a golden apple into the midst of the celebration. Inscribed upon it were the words "to the fairest," and immediately 3 goddesses claimed it: Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite. Zeus, wise enough to avoid choosing between his wife, his daughter, and the goddess of love, appointed a mortal judge, Paris, a prince of Troy who lived as a shepherd on Mount Ida, unaware of his royal birth. The 3 goddesses appeared before him, each more beautiful than mortal eyes had ever beheld, each offering a bribe for his favor. Hera promised him dominion over all of Europe and Asia, making him the greatest king who ever lived. Athena offered wisdom in battle and the skill to win every war he fought. But Aphrodite's offer proved irresistible, the love of the most beautiful woman in the world, Helen of Sparta. Paris, thinking with his heart rather than his head, awarded the apple to Aphrodite, unknowingly sealing the fate of his city. Helen was indeed the most beautiful woman alive, daughter of Zeus and Leda, so lovely that suitors came from every kingdom in Greece to seek her hand. Her earthly father, King Tyndareus, required all the suitors to swear an oath to defend whichever man Helen chose as her husband. She selected Menelaus, the red-haired king of Sparta, and for a time they lived in happiness, their palace filled with the laughter of their daughter, Hermione. But Aphrodite had made her promise, and the goddess of love always keeps her word. When Paris visited Sparta as Menelaus's guest, the power of divine love struck Helen like lightning. While her husband was away attending a funeral, she abandoned everything, her daughter, her crown, her honor, and sailed away with Paris to Troy, taking much of Sparta's treasure with her. Menelaus's rage shook the very foundations of his palace. He called upon all the former suitors to honor their oath, and they came. Agamemnon of Mycenae, mightiest of kings, crafty Odysseus from his island kingdom of Ithaca, Ajax the Great, tall as a tower and strong as a bull, Diomedes, the beloved of Athena, and countless other heroes whose names would echo through the ages. But the greatest warrior of all was reluctant to join them. Achilles, son of Thetis and Peleus, had been warned by his sea goddess mother that he faced a choice: a long, peaceful life in obscurity, or a short life of glorious fame. When the recruiters came to find him, his mother had disguised him as a woman among the daughters of King Lycomedes. But Odysseus, clever as always, brought gifts of jewelry and weapons. When Achilles instinctively reached for a sword instead of a necklace, his identity was revealed. The Greek fleet assembled at Aulis, but the winds refused to blow. The seer Calchas revealed that Artemis was angry because Agamemnon had boasted that he was a better hunter than the goddess herself. The price for favorable winds was terrible, the sacrifice of Agamemnon's daughter, Iphigenia. In anguish, the king chose his duty to the expedition over his love for his child, and the innocent girl died on the altar of Artemis, her blood crying out for vengeance that would follow Agamemnon home. When the Greeks finally reached Troy, they found a city unlike any they had ever seen. Its walls rose higher than cliffs, built by Poseidon and Apollo themselves in ages past. 6 great gates pierced these walls, each guarded by towers that seemed to touch the clouds. Within the walls lay palaces of unimaginable wealth, temples gleaming with gold and ivory, and gardens where flowers bloomed in eternal spring. King Priam ruled Troy with wisdom and justice, aided by his queen Hecuba and their children, greatest among whom was Hector, the noblest warrior who ever drew breath. Hector fought not for glory or conquest, but to protect his city, his wife Andromache, and their infant son Astyanax. In him, the Trojans saw everything they valued: courage, honor, love of family, and devotion to duty. The war that followed defied every expectation. Troy's walls proved impregnable to assault, and the Trojans, fighting to defend their homes, matched the Greeks in courage and skill. Year after year, the conflict dragged on, marked by individual combats between heroes, temporary truces, and interventions by the gods themselves. The gods chose sides as passionately as mortals. Hera, Athena, and Poseidon supported the Greeks, still angry over Paris's judgment. Apollo, Artemis, and Aphrodite favored Troy, while Ares switched sides based on his mood. Zeus tried to remain neutral, but found himself drawn into the conflict again and again. The war's turning point came in its 9th year, triggered by a quarrel between Agamemnon and Achilles over a captive woman named Briseis. When Agamemnon demanded her as compensation for returning his own captive, Chryseis, to her father, a priest of Apollo who had cursed the Greek camp with plague, Achilles' rage knew no bounds. The greatest warrior withdrew from battle, taking his feared Myrmidons with him. Without Achilles, the tide of war turned against the Greeks. Hector led the Trojans in assault after assault, driving the invaders back to their ships. In desperation, Patroclus, Achilles' closest friend, borrowed the hero's armor and led the Myrmidons back into battle. For a moment, it seemed the war might end as Patroclus scattered the Trojans like leaves before a storm, but Apollo himself intervened to save Troy. The gods struck Patroclus, dazing him and leaving him vulnerable to Hector's spear. The death of his beloved friend shattered something inside Achilles. His grief transformed into a rage so terrible that it frightened even the gods. When his divine mother brought him new armor forged by Hephaestus himself, Achilles returned to battle like a force of nature unleashed. The duel between Achilles and Hector took place before the walls of Troy, witnessed by both armies and by the gods themselves. 3 times Hector ran around the walls of his city, his courage finally failing him when faced with Achilles' supernatural fury. When they finally fought, there could be only one outcome. Hector fell, and Achilles, mad with grief and rage, dragged the noble hero's body behind his chariot, denying him the funeral rites that every warrior deserved. But Achilles' triumph was brief. Paris, guided by Apollo's hand, shot an arrow that found the one vulnerable spot on the hero's body, his heel, where his mother had held him when she dipped him in the river Styx. The greatest warrior of the age died from what seemed a minor wound, proving that no mortal, however mighty, can escape the fate the gods have woven for them. The war might have continued indefinitely, but Odysseus conceived a stratagem worthy of his reputation for cleverness. The Greeks built a massive wooden horse, hollow inside, and hid their greatest warriors within it. They then sailed away, leaving only the horse and a single Greek, Sinon, who told the Trojans that the horse was an offering to Athena that would make Troy impregnable if brought inside the walls. Despite warnings from the priest Laocoon and the prophet Cassandra, the Trojans dragged the horse inside their city. That night, as Troy celebrated what they thought was victory, the hidden Greeks emerged and opened the gates for their army, which had returned under cover of darkness. Troy fell in a single night of fire and blood, its walls breached not by strength, but by cunning. The sack of Troy was terrible to behold. Priam was killed at the altar of Zeus by Achilles' son Neoptolemus. Hector's infant son was thrown from the walls to prevent him from growing up to avenge his father. Cassandra was dragged from Athena's temple. Andromache was enslaved, and Helen, the cause of it all, was reunited with Menelaus, her beauty still so overwhelming that he could not bring himself to harm her. But the god's justice followed the victors home. Agamemnon was murdered by his wife Clytemnestra, who had never forgiven him for sacrificing their daughter. Ajax the Lesser was drowned by Poseidon for violating Athena's temple. Many ships were wrecked on the way home, and most of the heroes faced years of wandering or troubles in their kingdoms. The Trojan War became the defining story of Greek culture, retold in countless poems, plays, and songs. In it, they saw reflected all the complexities of human nature, love and hate, loyalty and betrayal, the glory of heroism and the futility of war. Most of all, they saw the truth that no victory comes without cost, and that the god's justice, though slow, is certain. As the ashes of Troy cooled and scattered on the wind, carrying with them the dreams of a great civilization, the survivors on both sides learned the hardest lesson of all, that in war, everyone loses something precious, and even the victors pay a price that echoes through the generations. The sun beats down mercilessly on the rocky hills of Nemea as a figure approaches the lion's cave. From a distance, he looks like any other traveler, but as he draws closer, his true nature becomes apparent. Standing over 7 feet tall, with shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of the world, and muscles that ripple like living bronze, this is Heracles, the strongest man who ever lived. But strength alone will not be enough for what awaits him in the shadowy depths ahead. Heracles was born to greatness, and cursed to suffering, the son of Zeus and the mortal woman Alcmene. From the moment of his conception, Hera's hatred pursued him like a relentless shadow. She delayed his birth so that his cousin Eurystheus would be born first, and thus have authority over him, according to Zeus's careless boast. When the infant Heracles was only 8 months old, Hera sent 2 enormous serpents to kill him in his cradle. But the baby's strength was already superhuman. He strangled both snakes with his bare hands, laughing as they died. Yet Hera's ultimate revenge came when Heracles had grown to manhood. Driven mad by the goddess's influence, he killed his own wife Megara and their 3 children in a fit of divine madness. When sanity returned and he saw what he had done, his grief was so profound, it seemed the earth itself mourned with him. Seeking purification and redemption, he consulted the oracle at Delphi, where Apollo's priestess delivered a prophecy that would define the rest of his life. He must serve his cousin, Eurystheus, the cowardly king of tyrants, for 12 years and perform whatever labors the king demanded. The first labor seemed impossible, even for Heracles. The Nemean lion terrorized the countryside, its golden hide so tough that no weapon could pierce it. The beast was one of the monsters spawned by the primordial forces of chaos, invulnerable to mortal arms and possessed of supernatural cunning. Heracles tried his arrows first, watching in amazement as they bounced off the lion's hide like raindrops. His sword shattered against the creature's neck. Even his mighty club, hewn from a tree and heavy enough to crush boulders, only angered the beast. Realizing that conventional weapons were useless, Heracles threw them aside and grappled with the lion using only his hands. For hours they wrestled in the dust, neither able to gain decisive advantage. But slowly, inexorably, Heracles' superhuman strength began to tell. He locked his arms around the lion's throat and squeezed until the great beast's breathing stopped forever. When it was over, he used the lion's own claws to skin it, for they were the only things sharp enough to penetrate the hide. From that day forward, he wore the golden pelt as armor, the lion's head serving as his helmet. The second labor took him to the swamps of Lerna, where the hydra lurked in water so poisonous that even the vapors could kill. This serpentine monster possessed 9 heads, and when one was cut off, 2 more grew in its place. Worse still, the central head was immortal and could never be destroyed. Heracles discovered the creature's regenerative power the hard way, watching in horror as his careful swordwork only made the monster stronger. But the hero was not alone in this task. His nephew Iolaus had followed him, and together they devised a strategy worthy of Athena herself. While Heracles chopped off the heads with his sword, Iolaus immediately cauterized each neck with burning brands, preventing regeneration. When only the immortal head remained, Heracles buried it under an enormous boulder that no force on earth could move. Before leaving, he dipped his arrows in the hydra's blood, making them deadly to anything they touched. The third labor required a different kind of strength, not just physical power, but endurance and patience. The golden hind of Artemis was sacred to the goddess of the hunt, a deer with golden antlers and bronze hooves that could outrun the wind itself. Eurystheus commanded Heracles to capture it alive, knowing that killing or harming Artemis's sacred animal would bring the goddess's terrible wrath down upon the hero. For an entire year, Heracles pursued the hind across mountains and valleys, through forests and meadows, never more than a day behind, but never quite close enough to make his capture. The chase became a test of wills as much as speed. Finally, exhausted and desperate, the hind paused to drink at a stream. Heracles' arrow, shot with perfect precision, pinned both front legs together without harming the animal. As he carried his prize back to Tiryns, he encountered Artemis herself, her silver eyes blazing with anger. Only when Heracles explained his circumstances and his need for redemption did the goddess allow him to continue, though she warned him that any harm to her sacred hind would bring swift retribution. The fourth labor brought him face to face with the Erymanthian boar, a creature of such size and ferocity that it had depopulated entire valleys. This massive beast, with tusks like ivory spears and a hide thick as armor, made its lair high in the mountains where winter never ended. Heracles drove the boar into deep snow, where its weight worked against it, then wrestled it into submission and carried it back alive. Eurystheus was so terrified when he saw the hero approaching with the massive boar on his shoulders that he hid in a bronze jar and refused to come out until Heracles had taken the creature away. The fifth labor seemed less heroic, but proved equally challenging. King Augeas of Elis had stables that housed 3,000 cattle and had not been cleaned for 30 years. The accumulation of filth was so enormous that it had become a health hazard for the entire kingdom. Eurystheus assigned this task to humiliate Heracles, knowing that even his supernatural strength could not move such a quantity of waste by hand. But Heracles' intelligence matched his physical gifts. He diverted two rivers, the Alpheus and the Peneus, causing them to flow through the stables and wash away all the filth in a single day. The sixth labor took him to Lake Stymphalia, where man-eating birds with bronze beaks and metallic feathers had made their roost. These creatures, sacred to Ares, could launch their feathers like arrows and devour human flesh with savage efficiency. The lake's marshy ground would not support Heracles' weight, making direct assault impossible. Once again, divine aid came from an unexpected source. Athena provided him with bronze castanets made by Hephaestus. The noise they created was so terrifying that the birds took flight in panic, allowing Heracles to shoot many of them down with his poisoned arrows, while the rest fled to the island of Ares, never to return. For his seventh labor, Heracles traveled to Crete to capture the Cretan bull, a magnificent white creature that Poseidon had sent from the sea. King Minos had promised to sacrifice this bull to the god, but was so taken with its beauty that he substituted another animal. In punishment, Poseidon made the bull mad and destructive. Heracles subdued the creature with his bare hands, then rode it across the sea to Greece, where he released it. The bull eventually made its way to Marathon, where it would later be captured by another hero, Theseus. The eighth labor brought Heracles to Thrace and a confrontation with Diomedes, a king who fed his mares on human flesh. These horses were not ordinary animals, but monsters of supernatural appetite and strength, made vicious by their unnatural diet. Heracles killed Diomedes and fed the king's own body to his horses, discovering that once they had consumed their master, their bloodlust was satisfied and they became docile. He led them back to Eurystheus, who released them into the wild, where they were eventually torn apart by wild beasts on Mount Olympus. The ninth labor took him to the land of the Amazons, the warrior women who lived without men and fought like the daughters of Ares himself. Their queen, Hippolyta, possessed a golden girdle given to her by the god of war, and Eurystheus' daughter demanded this treasure for herself. Heracles arrived prepared for battle, but found to his surprise that Hippolyta was willing to give him the girdle freely, impressed by his reputation and his noble bearing. But Hera, disguised as an Amazon, spread rumors that Heracles planned to kidnap the queen. The resulting battle was fierce and tragic, ending with Hippolyta's death and Heracles' bitter victory. The 10th labor seemed impossible, even by Heracles' standards. He was commanded to steal the cattle of Geryon, a three-bodied giant who lived on an island at the western edge of the world. To reach this distant place, Heracles had to cross the entire Mediterranean, a journey that took him through the Strait of Gibraltar, where he erected two great pillars that would bear his name forever after. On the island of Erythea, he fought and killed both Geryon and his two-headed guard dog, Orthrus, then drove the cattle across Europe in a journey that took him through nearly every land known to the ancient world. The 11th labor brought him to the very edge of the mortal world. The golden apples of the Hesperides, tended by nymphs in a garden at the world's end, were guarded by Ladon, a dragon with 100 heads that never slept. These apples granted immortality to those who ate them, making them among the most precious treasures in existence. Heracles' journey to find them took him across Africa and through the Caucasus, where he freed Prometheus from his eternal torment. In gratitude, the Titan advised him to seek help from Atlas, who held up the sky. Atlas agreed to fetch the apples himself if Heracles would take over his burden temporarily. Standing beneath the weight of the heavens, feeling the crushing pressure of the entire cosmos on his shoulders, Heracles experienced a glimpse of truly cosmic responsibility. When Atlas returned with the apples, he offered to deliver them to Eurystheus himself, hoping to be free of his burden forever. But Heracles tricked the Titan into resuming his load, supposedly just so he could adjust his cloak, then departed with the apples, leaving Atlas to his eternal task. The 12th and final labor was the most dangerous of all, to bring back Cerberus, the three-headed hound that guarded the gates of the underworld. This meant descending into the realm of the dead while still alive, something no mortal had ever attempted and survived. Hermes and Athena guided him to the entrance, but from there he had to proceed alone into the lightless depths where even heroes fear to tread. In the underworld, Heracles met Hades himself, lord of the dead, who agreed to let him take Cerberus on one condition. He must subdue the creature without using any weapons. The battle that followed shook the very foundations of the underworld. Cerberus was no ordinary dog, but a creature of pure nightmare, each head capable of breathing fire, his bite more venomous than the Hydra's. But Heracles' strength proved superior even here. He wrestled the monster into submission using only his hands, then carried the defeated hound into the sunlight, where its howls of fear and rage could be heard across all of Greece. When Eurystheus saw Heracles approaching with the hound of hell at his side, he was so terrified that he permanently banned the hero from his city. The 12 labors were complete, and Heracles had earned both redemption and a place among the greatest heroes of all time. But his story was far from over, for a man who could defeat death itself was destined for even greater adventures. The labors of Heracles became more than just tales of heroic achievement. They represented the human struggle against impossible odds, the idea that with enough courage, strength, and perseverance, even the most daunting challenges could be overcome. In each labor, ancient audiences saw their own battles against the monsters that plague human existence: fear, despair, hatred, and the seemingly impossible demands that life places upon us all. As Heracles stood on the shores of Tiryns, watching Cerberus disappear back into the shadows from whence he came, the hero reflected on the journey that had transformed him from a man cursed by the gods into a legend that would outlive kingdoms. The blood on his hands had been washed clean by heroic deeds, and though greater trials still awaited him, he had proven that redemption was possible for anyone willing to face their monsters and emerge victorious. The wine-dark sea stretches endlessly in all directions, its waves rolling in patterns that seem to whisper of distant shores and forgotten islands. Somewhere upon these waters, a single ship struggles against winds that blow from every direction at once, carrying a man whose greatest weapon is not his sword, but his mind. This is Odysseus, king of Ithaca, hero of Troy, and the most resourceful man who ever lived. But cleverness, he is learning, can be both blessing and curse when the gods themselves become your enemies. The story of Odysseus's journey home begins with the fall of Troy, that great city whose walls had stood for 10 years against the might of Greece. It was Odysseus who conceived the wooden horse that finally brought victory, his brilliant stratagem succeeding where brute force had failed. As the ashes of Priam's city cooled, and the Greek fleet prepared to sail home with their hard-won spoils, every warrior looked forward to reunion with family and the peace that victory should bring. But the gods had other plans for the man whose cunning had ended the greatest war in history. Odysseus's troubles began almost immediately when he and his 12 ships stopped at the island of the Cicones to raid for supplies. The attack succeeded, But Odysseus's men, drunk on victory and wine, ignored his orders to leave quickly. When reinforcements arrived, the Greeks were caught off guard. By the time they escaped, Odysseus had lost 6 men from each ship, the first payment in a toll that would grow ever higher. The real catastrophe began when they reached the island of the Cyclopes, where curiosity overcame caution. Odysseus chose to explore a large cave, hoping to receive gifts of hospitality from its owner. Instead, they found themselves trapped when Polyphemus, the Cyclops son of Poseidon, sealed the cave entrance with a boulder no dozen men could move. The one-eyed giant made his intentions clear immediately. He would eat 2 Greeks each day until none remained. But Odysseus had not survived the siege of Troy by accepting defeat easily. While Polyphemus slept, the hero and his men sharpened a massive olive wood stake and hardened it in the fire. When the Cyclops next drowsed from wine that Odysseus had given him, they drove the burning point deep into his single eye. Polyphemus's screams of agony brought other Cyclopes running, but when they asked what troubled him, he could only roar that nobody had hurt him, for that was the name Odysseus had given when asked. Thinking he was merely ill, they left him alone with his pain. In the morning, the blind Cyclops rolled away the stone to let his sheep out to pasture, feeling each animal to ensure no Greeks escaped with them. But Odysseus had anticipated this. He and his men clung to the bellies of the largest rams, hidden beneath their thick wool. They escaped to their ship, but then Odysseus made the mistake that would haunt him for 10 years. Unable to resist boasting of his cleverness, he revealed his true name to the Cyclops. Polyphemus immediately prayed to his father Poseidon for vengeance, and the sea god heard his son's plea. From that moment, Odysseus was marked for suffering. The god of earthquakes and storms would ensure that the hero's journey home became an epic of survival against impossible odds. The curse's power became apparent at their next stop, the floating island of Aeolus, keeper of the winds. The hospitable king listened to tales of the Trojan War, and impressed by Odysseus's heroism, gave him a leather bag containing all the adverse winds. With only the favorable west wind left free to blow, Odysseus's ship sped toward Ithaca so swiftly that they could see the smoke rising from their home's hearth fires. But after 9 days without sleep, watching over the mysterious bag that his men assumed contained treasure, Odysseus finally succumbed to exhaustion. His crew, convinced their leader was keeping gold from them, opened the bag while he slept. All the bound winds escaped at once, creating a storm so violent it blew them back to Aeolus's island. The Wind King, seeing that the gods opposed Odysseus's journey, refused to help again. Their next destination brought them face to face with cannibals. At the island of the Laestrygonians, giant man-eaters destroyed 11 of Odysseus's 12 ships, hurling boulders down from the cliffs like rain. Only Odysseus's own vessel escaped, carrying the survivors to an island that seemed peaceful but harbored its own deadly secret. Here dwelt Circe, the witch goddess, whose knowledge of herbs and magic surpassed that of any mortal. When Odysseus sent a scouting party to her palace, she welcomed them with a feast laced with magical drugs that transformed them into swine. Only Eurylochus escaped to bring word of their fate to Odysseus, who immediately set out to rescue his men despite the hopelessness of challenging a goddess. On the way, he encountered Hermes, the messenger god, who gave him a magical herb called moly that would protect him from Circe's magic. When the goddess tried to transform him as she had the others, her spells failed. Impressed by his resistance and his courage in demanding his men's restoration, Circe not only returned them to human form, but became Odysseus's lover and advisor. For a year they remained on her island, and Circe taught Odysseus the routes through the supernatural dangers that lay ahead. She warned him of the sirens, whose irresistible song drove men mad with longing. She described Scylla and Charybdis, the twin terrors that guarded a narrow strait. Most importantly, she told him that to learn his fate and find his way home, he must journey to the very edge of the world and consult the shade of the blind prophet Tiresias in the land of the dead. The journey to Hades was the most terrifying adventure of Odysseus's life. Following Circe's instructions, he sailed to the ends of the earth, where the sun never shines, and the entrance to the underworld lies shrouded in perpetual mist. There, he dug a pit and filled it with the blood of sacrificed sheep, whose scent drew the spirits of the dead like moths to flame. The first shade to appear was that of Elpenor, the youngest of his crew, who had died on Circe's island in a drunken fall from the roof. The young man's spirit begged Odysseus to return and give his body proper burial, for without funeral rites, he could not find peace in death. Next came Odysseus's mother, Anticlea, whose shade revealed that she had died of grief, waiting for a son who never returned. The hero tried 3 times to embrace her spirit, but his arms closed only on empty air. Finally, Tiresias appeared, the great prophet whose wisdom transcended death itself. He confirmed that Poseidon's anger was the source of Odysseus's troubles and would continue until the sea god's wrath was appeased. The prophet revealed the trials that lay ahead and the greater challenges waiting at home, where suitors consumed Odysseus's wealth while courting his wife Penelope. But he also offered hope. If Odysseus could overcome his trials and perform the proper rituals, he would eventually find peace. Other shades crowded around the blood-filled pit, eager to speak with the living hero. Agamemnon told of his murder by his treacherous wife, warning Odysseus to trust no one completely. Achilles, greatest of warriors, revealed that he would rather be the lowliest slave on earth than king of all the dead, showing that even glory has its limits. Ajax the Great, still angry over their quarrel at Troy, refused to speak at all, his silence more eloquent than any words. When Odysseus finally returned to the world of the living, he carried with him knowledge that few mortals possess, an understanding of death that made him value life more highly than ever before. But this wisdom came at a price, for he had seen the fate that awaits all mortals, and learned that even heroes cannot escape the common destiny of mankind. The journey homeward resumed with the ordeal of the sirens, those bird women whose songs revealed all the knowledge in the world, but drove listeners mad with impossible longing. Following Circe's advice, Odysseus had his men plug their ears with wax, while they bound him to the mast so tightly he could not break free. As they sailed past the Sirens' island, Odysseus heard their song and understood its terrible beauty. The creatures promised to reveal the future and the past, to answer every question that had ever tormented his mind. His desire to join them was so overwhelming that he begged his men to release him, but they only bound him tighter until the deadly music faded behind them. Next came the passage between Scylla and Charybdis, perhaps the most harrowing trial of all. Charybdis was a whirlpool that could swallow entire ships, sucking them down to the ocean floor 3 times each day. Scylla was a 6-headed monster dwelling in a cave opposite the whirlpool, each head capable of snatching a man from a passing ship. Odysseus was forced to choose between certain destruction and terrible loss. Following Circe's counsel, he steered closer to Scylla's cave, reasoning that losing 6 men was better than losing his entire ship to Charybdis. As they passed beneath the monster's lair, each of Scylla's heads darted down and seized one of his companions. Odysseus watched in helpless horror as his friends were lifted screaming into the air, calling his name even as they disappeared into the creature's maw. It was, he later said, the most heartbreaking sight of his entire journey. The final disaster struck when they reached the island of Thrinacia, where the cattle of the sun god Helios grazed in immortal herds. Tiresias had warned that these animals must not be harmed, but when contrary winds trapped them on the island for a month and their supplies ran out, Odysseus's starving men chose survival over obedience to divine law. While their leaders slept, exhausted by constant vigilance, they slaughtered the finest cattle for a feast. Helios's rage at this sacrilege shook the heavens. He demanded justice from Zeus, threatening to shine his light in the underworld instead of on the earth if the crime went unpunished. When Odysseus's ship finally escaped the island, Zeus struck it with a thunderbolt that shattered it to splinters. Every man drowned except Odysseus, who clung to pieces of wreckage and drifted for 9 days until the current carried him to Calypso's island. Calypso, the beautiful nymph daughter of Atlas, kept Odysseus prisoner for 7 long years, offering him immortality if he would stay as her lover forever. Her island was a paradise where flowers bloomed eternally and streams ran with honey, but it was still a prison to a man whose heart yearned for home. Each day Odysseus sat on the shore, staring across the waves toward the horizon where Ithaca lay, tears streaming down his face as he mourned for his lost companions and the family he might never see again. Finally, Athena intervened on her favorite hero's behalf, convincing Zeus to order Calypso to release him. Reluctantly, the nymph helped Odysseus build a raft and provisioned him for the final leg of his journey. But Poseidon, still unforgiving, sent one last storm that destroyed the raft and nearly drowned the hero within sight of land. Odysseus washed ashore on the island of the Phaeacians, where King Alcinous and Queen Arete received him with the hospitality due to any stranger. It was here, in their palace decorated with gold and silver, that Odysseus finally told the full story of his wanderings to an audience that listened in wonder and horror. The Phaeacians, moved by his tale and recognizing the hand of the gods in his sufferings, provided him with a ship that carried him home while he slept. When Odysseus finally awoke on the shores of Ithaca, after 20 years away, he had been transformed by his journey from a clever young king into a man of profound wisdom and unshakable determination. The trials that had destroyed his companions had tempered him like steel, teaching him patience, humility, and the true value of the home and family he had almost lost forever. But even then, his greatest challenge lay ahead. His palace was overrun with suitors who assumed him dead and competed for Penelope's hand and his throne. With Athena's help and his own matchless cunning, Odysseus would reclaim his kingdom and his wife, proving that sometimes the longest journey leads not to a new destination, but back to where we started, with new eyes to see the treasures we had always possessed. The Odyssey became more than just a tale of adventure. It became the archetypal story of the human journey through life, with all its trials, temptations, and the eternal longing for home that drives us forward even through the darkest storms.